open the pod bay doors.
Greetings and welcome to another exciting episode of the Cinematic Traveler Podcast. I am your intrepid movie-exploring host, Chris, and on this special episode, we are going to deviate a little bit from my normal movie reviewing pattern to talk about a film series that I have wanted to talk about for a while. That, of course, being the first 6 films in the Star Trek cinematic universe. And on this episode, starting the series, I will be reviewing the very first film in the series, the 1979 movie entitled Star Trek: The Motion Picture, directed by Robert Wise. Now, before I get to all the excitement, I do have to ask you one favor. If you could, whatever you're listening to this podcast on, there is somewhere on that device screen somewhere is a follow button. If you could tap that follow button, I would greatly appreciate it, as it does help me get the show out there to more people. Plus, it helps you because you won't miss any episodes coming in the future. And since we're starting this series, you're definitely going to want to be following the show to keep up with that. You can also keep up with me on social media. I'm on Instagram at Cinematic Traveler Pod, which is the easiest way to get in touch with me. I'm also on Twitter at CMT Pod. Blue Sky, whatever that is, at Cinematic Traveler Pod. And I also have an email address, thecinematictravelerpod@gmail.com. So you have plenty of ways to get in touch with me and follow the show and keep up with all of these amazing episodes and listen to my sexy, sexy voice. So now that I've gotten that out of the way, go ahead and join me in the transporter room and let's go ahead and beam on over to my review of Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Yes, there's going to be a lot of cheesy sound effects and really bad William Shatner impersonations throughout the series on these Star Trek movies. Now, I am going to follow a very similar pattern with my normal movie reviews. As I will give you a plot synopsis, and then I will give you my full-on review. For any of my regular listeners, I am not going to be hiding any movie quotes in the plot synopsis. We won't be doing that contest on these since they're just kind of fun episodes for me to do. This is something I've wanted to do since I had my own podcast, a couple years ago when I first started that one. But I don't often talk about movies like those past movies. I'm really testing myself with these. I don't do it on this, and we hardly do it on the Just Go Watch podcast. So this is going to be adventure for both you and me. Now, I know you're asking why? Why Star Trek of all things? Well, I will get to that, but I don't want to keep you waiting on the plot synopsis for this film.
Do you mind telling me what this is all about, mister?
So, with Star Trek: The Motion Picture, again directed by Robert Wise, a name that might be familiar to you. He directed the original West Side Story, The Sound of Music, one of my favorites, The Sand Pebbles, as well as dipping his toe into sci-fi with The Andromeda Strain. So, as the movie opens, we travel to the 23rd century, where we meet 3 Klingon ships flying into a mysterious cloud in space. Now, being Klingons, of course, they go in guns a-blazing, but the unknown alien at the center of the cloud, he's not impressed at all by this display and quickly dispatches these intruders. Now, this catches the attention of Starfleet, and they track the trajectory of this destructive force, and they figure out that it's headed right for Earth. Now, wouldn't you know it, the only ship in the vicinity is the USS Enterprise. However, she is being refitted and not quite ready for action. This is where we meet Admiral James Tiberius Kirk, once again played by William Shatner, who hasn't commanded a starship in a few years since he got his promotion, but Starfleet has called upon him to lead this mission against this strange alien force because he has some experience boldly going where no one has gone before. Unfortunately for the current leader of the Enterprise, Captain Decker, played by an actor whose name we will not use on this podcast or especially in this episode, because he is a very, very bad piece of shit human being who's done some horrible things. It's very unfortunate because I used to like him as an actor, but there are some things actors do that I cannot overlook. So we're not going to say his name. But anyway, Captain Decker, he is none too happy that Kirk has taken over command, and this ruffles his feathers a bit. But Kirk, he doesn't have time for that. So he enlists some help from some familiar faces. Of course, he has to have Dr. McCoy, Bones, by his side, played by DeForest Kelley. He beams him up from, I don't know, I guess a futuristic disco or swingers club or something, but I don't know where he was coming from. But at any rate, he also is joined by Uhura, played by Nichelle Nichols, Chekhov, played by Walter Koenig, Sulu, played by George Takei, Scotty, played by James Doohan, and of course the incomparable Mr. Spock, played by the late great Leonard Nimoy. So Kirk and our band of heroes take the Enterprise out into the void and chase down this mysterious entity known as V'ger and try to stop it before it reaches Earth and ends all life on this blue and green ball bouncing through the cosmos. Now, will our beloved heroes stop this strange alien intruder in time? Or will the alien life form... shit. This is the first movie of 6 movies with this cast and this crew. So I think you know pretty much how this movie's going to end. So I'm not going to insult your intelligence. But I am going to bring you the best review of Star Trek the Motion Picture in all the podcasts, nay, in all the universe. Especially right now, because I doubt there's anybody else out there reviewing that movie. So before I get to the review, let me answer the question I asked earlier, why Star Trek? Well, to be honest with you, I am a Star Wars guy. I grew up a Star Wars kid and saw that in the movie theater. Now that I'm telling you how old I am, I actually have seen Star Trek the Motion Picture in the movie theater when it first came out. I was too young. I didn't get it. I thought it was a boring old crappy sci-fi movie that was not near as good as Star Wars, which is true. It's not near as good as Star Wars, but I didn't understand what the movie was or who these people were. Now, as I got older, my dad is a big Star Trek fan, and he kind of got me into Star Trek. We used to watch the repeats every night of the old original series crew, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. So my fandom developed then. I love those characters and the way they interacted with each other and the crazy 60s cheesy adventures that they went on. So ever since then, I've been a big Star Trek fan. Like I said, mostly the original series crew. Although I will admit I'm not a fan who knows like what levels Captain Kirk's quarters are on or anything like that, or how the engine, how many, the lithium crystals and all that shit. I know very little about that, but I am a fan of the show and these movies. And like I said, this was something I wanted to try way back when I had my first podcast. And I figured it'd be a fun little adventure for us to not only relive these movies, but to see how I do with talking about these older franchises. And maybe we could continue on with different franchises through the year. So we'll see how this goes. But if you are new to the podcast, I do break my reviews down into 3 segments: the good, the bad, and the nitpicky. The good is the stuff that works for me in the movie. The bad is obviously stuff that doesn't. And the nitpicky are things that are neither good nor bad, just things they put in these movies, sometimes Hollywoodisms, or sometimes just stuff that stands out to me that triggers something in my weird little brain that makes me laugh. And hopefully I can make you laugh as well. And one more thing before I get into it. I know, I hear you. Just get on with it already. I'm not going to do like a retrospective of the movie. I am going to talk a little bit about some of the trivia and the history of the movie, but I don't want to go into any deep dives or anything. I want to keep this as close to a regular movie review as I possibly can. So let's start with the good of Star Trek, the motion picture. I will say visually, this movie is absolutely incredible. I did rewatch it on Paramount Plus, and it was the director's edition. So the movie's had some touch-ups here and there and some stuff added to it. But overall, on the sci-fi level, I think this movie is absolutely gorgeous. It has some incredible model work from the Enterprise. Oh, they did her justice in this movie, which I wish I could go back and see it for the first time. I know I was a little kid when I saw it, but to see it now, because you got to think, the series went off, I think, 68, 69? So it had been 10 years since anybody had seen the Enterprise. let alone out on the big screen. And when you see this model, and they do definitely give you some Enterprise porn throughout the movie, but it is an incredible model. It's the detail on it is superb. You also have some other models with other crafts that look great. The Klingon warships at the beginning look awesome. All the Starfleet bases and whatnot. You have some beautiful matte paintings throughout, especially when they get to the V'ger ship and the big cloud that he's in. I mean, that is absolutely gorgeous and otherworldly as you're flying through it. Sort of has the mix of, like I said, the matte paintings and some like electric fields and lightning. It's the smoke. They did an amazing job with that. And it really conveys that, the alienness of this craft and what's coming after Earth. Keep you on the edge of your seat because you don't know for the longest time that it is something at the middle of the center. You just think it's this incredibly destructive force coming our way. And a lot of these visuals are attributed to people like Douglas Trumbull, who was visual effects director for 2001 Space Odyssey. And I think before this, he did Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And there was also John Dykstra, who had done Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica and gone on and done countless other movies after that. So you had a real good pedigree of these special effects people really at the cusp of this new age of special effects. And they really poured it on the screen. This movie at the time, I think, was the most expensive movie ever made. And unlike a lot of movies today where you're like, where the hell did the budget go? With this movie, when you watch it, you know where every dollar went because they did an amazing job with the special effects and the visuals. And they go hand in hand with the music. Jerry Goldsmith handles the music, the score of this film. And what really helps the sort of weirdness or alienness of the cloud is when the ship goes in. They use a musical instrument that was specifically designed for this movie called the blaster beam. Now, this musical instrument was 15 feet long, and it incorporated artillery shell casings and motorized magnets. It was also invented by a child star named Craig Huxley, who, in fact, portrayed Captain Kirk's nephew, Peter Kirk, in Operation Annihilate, and Tommy Starnes in And the Children Shall Lead. So again, it's a really weird-sounding instrument that adds to the dread and mysterious nature of V'ger. Also, this is the first time you hear the Klingon theme song that will play, God, every time you see the Klingons for the rest of Star Trek history. And this is the first time that song makes its appearance. So it goes hand in hand with the model work and the visuals, much like Star Wars did before that. Of course, Star Wars does have a big influence on this film, as Paramount was, actually they were planning to do a new Star Trek series. It was going to be called Star Trek Phase 2. And Shatner was going to be Admiral Kirk in that as well. But when Star Wars came out and just took the world over, they decided, let's go ahead and change some things here and there and make this a movie. And hence we got Star Trek The Motion Picture. And speaking of Shatner, he does an incredible job as Admiral Kirk. I know Shatner gets a lot of grief for his acting, but I think he is excellent as Kirk throughout these movies. In fact, I think these films kind of elevate him. He actually is a movie star in these movies as opposed to just a television star who stepped into movies, if that makes any kind of sense. I think he really embraced the larger than life nature of these movies. And I think this starts off the trend of all of his excellent performances as Kirk. Yes, he's Shatner, but you can't separate Shatner from Kirk at this point. I like the fact that very early on in the movie, he's got that sort of desire to get back out there and get in the Enterprise and get out into space and deal with this mysterious creature. So he's willing to kind of step on people like Decker. He's willing to push people harder than they probably need to be pushed because he is so determined to prove that he can still do it. But there's this level of unfamiliarity with the Enterprise because, like I said, it's been refitted. So he doesn't know how some of the things work or where things are. There's a point where he actually gets lost in one of the hallways and he asks he's like, Ensign, which way is lift, whatever. And then when he finds out, he kind of has to readjust himself and walk like an admiral. It's a cool little scene that he does here and there. He has a few of them throughout the movie where he kind of is dealing with the uncertainty of the Enterprise and really the uncertainty of himself if he could still do it. But once they get inside the V'ger cloud, it's almost like you see this transformation where he becomes the Captain Kirk that we knew from the series. He's in charge. He's taking risks, but he knows when to back off and when to push a little further into this cloud and test this alien and maybe use his intelligence and use the people around him and what they're offering him to form his decisions in dealing with this creature. So I think really Shatner is the presence in the film that lifts it. That, you know, every scene he's in, he's really great as Kirk. And you can tell he's excited to be stepping back into that role. You also have, of course, everybody coming back. DeForest Kelley, he's still Bones, crotchety old Bones, who's got a little smart-ass comments here and there. And Leonard Nimoy, it's a different version of Mr. Spock, because early on in the film, he is doing the Kalinar, which is this Vulcan thing where he's purging all of his emotions and going pure logic. But then he gets this, I guess he's got the Force in this movie, which I thought was a little bit weird. So he has this connection with V'ger. So he gets on board the Enterprise to help them find him. So that he's really cold and distant with the whole crew, even Kirk. And then it just is sort of, as the movie goes along and he finds out that V'ger is longing for this human knowledge, this human feeling, what it's like, what's more to learn from that. And he learns that, you know, he can do that as Spock, as a Vulcan, because he has that half-human side. Then he starts to become the Spock that we know, and he has a few back and forths with DeForest Kelley, or Bones, as it were. I would say the rest of the cast is fine. We'll get into some of those issues there. I liked Decker. I don't want to say that actor's name, but I like that he's got this adversarial element to him and Kirk. He does not like Kirk coming on board the Enterprise, especially right before it's ready to go, which, it's understandable. I'd be like if you had a project at work and you had done all the work and your boss comes in like the day before it's ready. Goes, I'll take it from here. You're like, hey, kiss my ass. I've done all the work here. So there's a real pushing of both characters where Kirk's trying to be as patient as he can be because he kind of understands what's going on, but he has to be forceful when he needs to be as well. And you got Decker, who is a commander in and of himself, and he's pushing back. However, he's a little more cautious than Kirk, and it's kind of cool to see his character towards the end start to take risk, even the biggest risk that saves everybody's lives. So I did like that sort of interplay between the two. There's also Ilea, the Deltan. I think that was it. For those of you that don't know, apparently the Deltans are super sexual beings, which makes sense. I always thought that line was weird until I found out what she was, where she comes on board and she's like, my vow of celibacy is on record. I was like, what the hell is she talking about? But yeah, they're so sexual. Their pheromones are so strong that human beings would die if they had sex with them. Which, I mean, that's a good way to go, right? Death by snoo-snoo. But she's an interesting character. I'll get into some of these later. She's got a little bit of a past with Decker, and she gets, I guess, killed by V'ger, but replaced by a replicant. And that's where sort of the bond between her and Decker feeds into V'ger, who wants more than just the knowledge it has acquired, which is probably the last positive of the movie. And I know this is one of those things, Star Wars fans and Star Trek fans. Oh, I swear, Star Trek fans always like, Star Wars it's just dumb popcorn fun. Well, Star Trek has had a lot of dumb moments too in it. So let's get off our high horse there. All right. Yeah, you know what? I'm a Star Wars guy first and foremost, but I love Star Trek too. We can't love both of them, but I will say this is a more cerebral approach to science fiction. The filmmakers were trying to parallel something like 2001: A Space Odyssey, where it was more leaning into the science fiction than the space opera that Star Wars is. And that's what V'ger is. It's actually Voyager 6, a probe that was sent out by NASA, I don't know how many years ago, that got into a black hole and landed on a planet that was, I guess, machines. And then it became self-aware. And it tries to complete its mission of telling its maker everything it learned. So the maker will tell it what happens next. Of course, we're the makers. It doesn't understand that, but it comes back to Earth to try to meet its maker. And that is the pushing force for V'ger. It wants to know what it is or why it is. We all reach that point is like, why the hell am I here? What is this all about? And that's what V'ger is trying to figure out. And that's when it really comes to the conclusion that it needs more than the knowledge it has gained traveling through all these galaxies and across the universe, yeah, it knows that stuff, but it doesn't process. It wants more. It wants feelings. It wants love. It wants to know how to touch another human being and what that feeling is. Basically, V'ger just wants to get laid. It's come back to Earth just to get laid. So yeah, there's a lot of sexual undertones throughout this movie, and it is sort of a common sci-fi trope nowadays. I mean, you had Blade Runner. I don't know how many other movies are like that. I mean, hell, I think even the original series did that. I can't remember the name of the episode, but remember what was the one with Nomad? And he was kind of that way. He was a probe that wanted to meet its maker, and Kirk pretended to be his maker or something like that. Anyway, it's a theme that's been done before, but I think they do it very well throughout this movie. And while it is striving to be a more cerebral movie than Star Wars, and this is where we're going to move into the bad or negative of the movie, that's where the movie struggles mightily. Again, it doesn't help that it did follow Star Wars, which is, I mean, we all know how much fun that movie is, and it is an action-y popcorn kind of movie. There's more to it than a lot of Star Trek fans will give it credit for. But when you go from that to this movie, yeah, even as a child, like I said, it is boring. Even now when I rewatch it, it's still, God, this movie is just too damn long. Robert Wise was really indulging on things. I did see some of the behind the scenes stuff where he was so in love with Jerry Goldsmith's score for the film that instead of editing the music down, he told the special effects people to give him more special effects, especially in the V'ger cloud, so that he can have more of that music on the screen. And you feel the length of this movie when you're watching it. It's like 2 hours and 20 minutes. I think the version I watched was, and yeah, it feels like about 3. I mentioned the Enterprise porn. You get a very lengthy segment of this movie where you are in a shuttle with Kirk and Scotty as they're flying past the Enterprise for the first time, and you see every panel, every nut and bolt on the outside of the spacecraft. And don't get me wrong, I love the Enterprise. It's my second favorite sci-fi spaceship. I mean, of course, the Millennium Falcon will always be number one, but I love the Enterprise, and it is one of those things that I don't think the J.J. Abrams movie did very well, is communicate that the Enterprise is a character in and of itself. I mean, Kirk, everybody likes to go, Kirk just goes around banging green alien women, and he doesn't, he's a chauvinist or whatever. He was not. He was in love with the Enterprise. That was his girl. That was his passion. That was all he wanted to be, was the captain of the Enterprise, and he loved that spaceship. And like I said, it was a character in and of itself. In the show, whenever you needed the Enterprise to do whatever to save the day, it would do that. So you really bonded with it. So as you watch it again on the screen, yes, I love it. Loved looking at it. The model is absolutely amazing, but my God, it goes on forever. I had a certain point, I was like, Jesus, just get on the goddamn ship already. You also get a lot of reaction shots in the movie. Something will be happening on the screen, and you have to see like everybody's face on the bridge to see their reaction of shock and awe of what's going on. And it just really bogs down a scene, because you're like, okay, I don't need to see everybody's reaction. Maybe give me Kirk's or Spock's or even Deckard, but good God, I don't need to see what the unnamed lady at her station in the corner of the bridge thinks on her face of what's going on the screen. Just give me a few reaction shots. Oh my God. I did mention that, you get some amazing, beautiful shots throughout the cloud of the V'ger cloud. And again, I mean, just the work and the artistry that went into that is absolutely breathtaking to look at. But again, it just goes on forever and ever and drags the movie down. The pacing is, oh my God, you think you're starting to get somewhere, and then you stop and you have a long drawn out segment of the Enterprise flying somewhere, or a long drawn out segment of people reacting to something on the screen, and you're like, God, just get there. Or else you have dialogue. And this is probably going to be a reoccurring theme, because Star Trek is known for this, where you have sort of over-explaining things, where you'll have a character say, how to either deal with a situation or what something might be, and then you have another character who has to ask a question to sort of dumb it down for us in the audience so we understand what they're talking about. So you get a lot of repeated things where you're just sitting there and go, yeah, I just heard that guy say the same exact fucking thing, just in a different way. I don't need to be talked down to. But, that pacing it's one of the most brutal parts of this movie. Also, as much as I loved Kirk and Shatner being back and the whole crew being back, just the chemistry just isn't there in this movie. I will say, and I'm going to give credit to Red Letter Media with Rich Evans and Mike over there. They're big Star Trek fans. They did an episode on Star Trek motion picture years ago, and I remember watching it. And they brought up something that when I rewatched it, I was like, oh, that makes sense. But they talked about how the crew, when you first meet everybody, it's not the same as when they were on the show. They don't have that camaraderie or that chemistry together. And they said it's something akin to like a high school reunion. Like if you had a best friend group in high school, and then after you graduated, everybody goes their separate ways. Well, when you come back to high school reunion, yeah, there's still something there, but it's not the same because your life has gone in a different direction and things are changed a little bit. And they said, that's something that this film does. And by the end of the movie, yeah, you get some of that back. You get Kirk back. You get Spock's got a little more of his Spockness to him. And McCoy is back to being grumpy old bones again. But as much as I can give this movie a little leeway in that regard, it just feels off through a lot of the movie, which hurts some of the performances, especially Leonard Nimoy very early. I know he's not supposed to have any emotion or anything, but man, he is about a plank of wood very early on when he's on board the ship. And like I said, I get why. It just, that's not what you want when you see this movie. And I kind of feel bad for, like, I can imagine, well, I mean, I guess as a Star Wars fan, I can't imagine because I remember The Phantom Menace. But just to let you know a little history for Star Trek, after the show was canceled, there was a lot of letter writing and this whole campaign, this underground roots campaign to bring the show back and to keep the show alive. And it got into syndication and it grew a little more and a little more. And that's when you first started getting these, I don't know if Comic-Cons are the right words, but they would have conventions, Star Trek conventions, and that kind of birthed all of these conventions that we have now, horror movie conventions and all that shit. They were the first to do it, and they kept Star Trek alive, and they wanted a new show, and then they wanted a movie, and they finally got it. And then I can imagine going into the movie theater and being excited to see your heroes again, and they don't like each other. I mean, the very beginning of this movie, it feels like they're all going to fist fight each other at certain points. And I can feel why that would be. I was disappointed when I watched it again. As I mentioned, I can relate as a Star Wars fan. The Phantom Menace, I walked out of that like, oh, what was that? It took me a while to process that movie. That is to say here, I could understand what they're going for, but as a Star Trek fan, that's kind of not what you want. And even in the behind-the-scenes stuff, William Shatner, he said that when he watched it, he was like, oh, God, we're never going to get another movie because this is long, boring, and we don't have the same chemistry. And I think DeForest Kelley and Leonard Nimoy, they all went to the writers and everybody and said, hey, this isn't what our characters are or were. And they wouldn't do things like this, and they just ignored them. So you could really tell that chemistry just isn't there. It will come. Obviously, we're going to get to the next movie, which changes things a lot. But without that dynamic, it never really feels like Star Trek. You also, with Uhura and Sulu, Chekhov, Scotty, they're really in the background in this movie. And again, that might be a common theme through some of these movies, but they don't do a lot. You'll see them every now and then reacting to things, or they might have a line here and there. But for the most part, they're just kind of like, oh, there's Uhura. We'll see her in 20 minutes. She'll be reacting to something on the screen again for 40 minutes. But all of that combined is what really drags this movie down. I think if they had shaved off, you could have just shaved off things that were like flying through the V'ger cloud or the Enterprise porn. You could have saved minutes of this movie off and cut it down to probably 2 hours on the dot, and it would have felt like it was moving a little bit faster and, maybe gave these characters a little more life to them, a little more like the show, at least. Like I said, at the end, you kind of get the feeling that it's going back in that direction. I think if that would have come a little sooner, maybe it would have helped. So let's go ahead and move into the nitpicky. And again, these are things that are neither good nor bad, just things that I see on the screen, either Hollywoodism or whatnot, that make me laugh. And hopefully you can find some of them funny, because I'm trying really hard to make you laugh. A few points in this episode. Let me know how I'm doing. My first nitpick is that, while this movie does have some really cool sci-fi looking stuff in it, ooh, it's got some very 1970s uniforms in this movie. They're like these, I don't know, onesie uniform looking things, and they are snug in places that you really don't want them to be snug. There's a lot of moose knuckle in this movie. I felt bad for these actors. I was like, oof. I can't imagine going to the premiere and having your family there. And there you are in your uniform where we could see whether you've been circumcised or not. So yeah, be prepared with these uniforms. They are very 70s. There's also some hairstyles and whatnot where I was like, ooh, boy, that didn't age well. My next nitpick for this movie, and this one I almost put into the bad of the movie or the negative, because this scene, it always drives me crazy when I watch it, and I don't know if it's me, so that's why I put it in the nitpicky. But there's a point in the movie where they're in warp speed and they inadvertently go into a wormhole or open a wormhole, and inside the wormhole there's an asteroid right in front of them, and they can't break free, so they have to destroy the asteroid. Well, Kirk orders them to use the phasers. Because of the new changes to the Enterprise, they can't use the phasers in warp or it'll mess something up. So they have to use the photon torpedoes. And you got Aaliyah, and she's sitting there going, 20 seconds to impact, and it's shot in like the slow-mo. It's a really cool looking shot. I'll give it that. It's got a really neat visual effect to it, but everything's like really super slow-mo. And then Deckard's like, belay that order, and they got 20 seconds and he has to yell that out, and armed torpedoes, and he runs over to the console where Chekhov is so he can help it. I'm like, there is no way. This is the longest 20 seconds in cinema history. I think the scene lasts about 15 minutes for 20 seconds. And I was like, no, they'd be dead by now. And it, like I said, it just drives me crazy because, like, just tell him to use the photon torpedoes. You don't have to run over to the console. But that might just be me. That might be a really personal one right there. And my last one for this movie. Here we are in the 23rd century, and there's a point, another cool moment in the movie where V'ger sends this probe over, and it's like this beam of light that goes through the bridge, and it's a really cool effect as well. I like the way it was shot. But it goes over to Spock's computer, and it starts downloading like information about the Enterprise and the Federation and all that. So they try to turn the computer off, but it zaps them with some lightning looking shit. So here we are in the 23rd century, mind you, with this advanced technology. Is there some other way that we could turn this computer off without having to go near the console? Nah, just ball up your fist and punch it. That's what Spock does. He just balls up his fist and starts punching the computer. And I thought, it's nice to know that the things that I do to get my laptop to work, or I smack my phone around a little bit, that transcends into the 23rd century. We're still using that basic form of machine repair in the future. All right, that wraps up our nitpicky section. I forgot I didn't inject a lot of trivia into this review. Let me go ahead and just say if y'all do a little better on the next one. But very early on, like I said, you got the Klingons, and this was the first time they had ever used Klingons' native language. You never heard it in the original series. And the dialogue that was spoken in Klingon was invented by James Doohan, Scotty himself. I thought that was pretty interesting. Later on, I think it's Star Trek 3, they have a linguist from UCLA who came in and invented the whole language. He also was on this movie and invented the Vulcan language that they use, which is pretty cool. I saw that in a behind-the-scenes video. I thought it was absolutely amazing how he came up with this language. Another little piece of trivia I thought was cool was that this was the first McDonald's Happy Meal movie tie-in ever. And it makes me laugh that you would think some little kid, and I actually think I got a Happy Meal with Star Trek on it, if I remember right. But it just makes me laugh that would be the first movie tie-in. This cerebral, slow-paced, plodding along movie. Let's put that on our kids' Happy Meal. It just made me laugh. And my final one was, and I thought this one was pretty cool. Grace Lee Whitney, who played Yeoman Rand. Remember her with the blonde beehive wig? She played her in the original series. Well, after the end of the series, she kind of fell in with some addictions, as well as she had some run-ins with some producers who, well, you know what producers used to do back in the, well, I don't know if they still do, but they did things to women that weren't right. So at any rate, she had a lot of issues after the series ended, and she was down on her luck. Well, through the years before this movie, Shatner had generally reached out to her from time to time to see how she was doing, which, again, I think is cool because Shatner gets a lot of shit, but I think that was pretty cool he did that. Well, when they announced the movie, he wanted her to have a part in the movie so that she could get a paycheck, basically. So he went to Leonard Nimoy and kind of explained the situation to him. And the both of them went to the filmmakers and said, hey, we want her in the movie so we can help her out a little bit. So they gave her a small role. She was only on film for a couple of days, but she did get a paycheck. She came back for a few more movies after that. But I just thought that was kind of nice because you do hear a lot of crap about Shatner and all the shit that, you know, they had to deal with when they shot these movies and a TV series and what he's like. But I thought that was kind of cool that he reached out to help someone who was kind of down and out at that point in their career. So again, those are a few little bits of trivia. I didn't want to go into a deep dive and tell you all the background to this movie. You can go find that stuff for yourself because I'm not making a 3-hour-long podcast about Star Trek the Motion Picture. Now, Star Trek 2, that one could go on for a while. So overall, my final verdict on Star Trek the Motion Picture, I will tell you at the end of the 6th episode in this series, I am going to rank them all where I'd put them, but not to give anything away. But this one's going to be very low on the list because while I have grown to appreciate the movie more through the years and I can see sort of what it was trying to do and, you know, how it was supposed to take these characters that had been apart for a while and kind of get them by the end of the movie to be the characters that we knew. It's just a plodding, slow movie, and they really needed to shave some time off this movie and tighten it up. I think if they'd have done that, this would be one of the better Star Trek movies out there. But as it is now, I would not recommend rushing out to see this. This was one where I think if you had never seen Star Trek, or if you know someone and they know you're a Star Trek fan, they're like, oh, where should I start with these movies? I would probably let them see a few movies and get into it. Maybe even watch the original series and kind of find their love for Star Trek if they're going to, because you got to love Star Trek to enjoy this movie. If you have a love for Star Trek, I feel like this movie probably is like, I don't know. It's like an ugly dog, you know? I don't know. It sounds awful, but you know, sometimes there's a dog that's so ugly that you're like, oh man, he's ugly, but I still love him. That's what this movie is like for me. I'm like, yeah, I know she ain't exactly winning any beauty pageants, but yeah, I gotta love her. So yeah, I would, if you're not a Star Trek fan, I would definitely wait. There are much better entries in the series that I will get to, but I think if you do get into the movie series, it's a good one to circle back to and see where it all started. Because like I said, I do think it's a beautiful looking movie, and I think Shatner's performance is worth watching. So that brings us to the end of our first review in this series of Star Trek movies. How do you think I did? I had a lot of fun watching the movie and talking about it. What say you? Have you seen the movie? Are you a Star Trek fan? Where would you rate this? What do you think? I would love to hear from you. You can get in touch with me on Instagram at Cinematic Traveler Pod. That's probably the best way to do it. Or my email, thecinematictravelerpod@gmail.com. Let me know what you think. I will be back again soon with the next film in the series, of course. That would be Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. But until then, you can still listen to my wit and charm on my regular reviews. If you're new to the podcast, I generally have them out Sunday or Monday for a new release in the movie theater. And then I end the week with a streaming surprise episode where I'll review some movie on a streaming service. So definitely come back. I have contests and things on that on the regular version of the show. So you definitely want to check that out. Now, before I leave, I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to my podcast. I greatly appreciate you as an audience member. And I tell everyone I know, I've got the smartest and sexiest audience in all the podcast universe. And you never fail to live up to those high expectations. Now, as you are traveling around on this blue and green ball bouncing through the cosmos, I need you to do one thing for me. Live long and prosper.